An independent autopsy report has ruled George Floyd's death a homicide caused by asphyxia due to neck and back compression that led to a lack of blood flow to the brain. Now, this comes after days of protests across the country in the wake of George Floyd's death. And we're lucky to be joined once again by MTV News host Dometi Pongo. And Dometi, I want to get your quick reaction on this latest development, because obviously the findings of this report comes after a county medical examiner had suggested that underlying health conditions might have been the cause of George Floyd's death. But obviously this report and the results of it say otherwise. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. This report confirms what we saw with our eyes, but puts it in medical terms, in legalese that will be very crucial as this plays out in the court system. They determined that the cause of death was actually homicide by asphyxia, but then also that there were no pre-existing conditions. And that part is key, because that was the part that the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office said was the primary cause of George Floyd's death. Now, if you watch the video, you see someone, having their neck pressed on for 8 minutes. It almost seemed laughable to hear that from the medical examiner's office. So this independent autopsy was very important to this case.
And it's important to this case because as of right now, as of the time we're shooting this, I should say filming this, obviously there's only been one officer who has been taken into custody. And there have been, of course, four officers who have been arrested as a result of this incident. And the other three have yet to be charged. Do you think this will help kind of move that forward?
Yeah, there were 4 officers involved. The other 3 have yet to be charged. And this is important to note. I've been researching these other officers. Many of them have gone radio silent, scrubbed their social media. Many of them have left town. People can't get in touch with them. And so I want to see how this begins to play out. And hopefully this independent autopsy will help to, alleviate some concern there and at least bring these folks in for questioning or more intense investigation. Now, following what has happened in the past, anytime an officer commits any act of violence against someone, be hard-pressed to find situations where, an investigation actually does anything but exonerate these officers. But I hope that's different here. There's one point that I want to make, too, about the medical examiner's office. There are multiple cases in which technicalities result in exonerations for police officers. I'm thinking about in Chicago, there was a case of a woman by the name of Rekia Boyd. Mm-hmm. An officer, off-duty detective named Dante Servin, fired into a crowd, and the fatal shot hit Rekia Boyd and killed her. He was charged with reckless homicide. A judge ruled that he wasn't guilty of reckless homicide because he should have been charged with first-degree murder. Mm-hmm. So he went free on a technicality, though the judge said that he believed that officer should have had a higher charge. So not only are we looking at charges that may need to be taken for these other officers who were allegedly complicit in the killing of George Floyd, but also we need to take a look at how that third-degree murder charge may play into the litigious nature of this down the line.
And that's obviously just one of many reasons and causes that people have been rightfully outraged, certainly over the weekend. I mean, we've seen so many protests and people taking to the streets. These images and the people who are speaking, it's harrowing and it's really powerful. And obviously, there's a reported 140 cities that have really erupted in this protest. Some of them peaceful, some of them started peaceful, some of them turned violent. But I do want to start by talking about the peaceful protests in particular, because we haven't seen much focus on that. And from your perspective and your point of view, were there any images of peace or any protests that really stick in your mind from over the weekend?
I'm so glad you asked that, Denny. There were so many beautiful, peaceful protests. There were officers in Queens who kneeled with protesters. Mm-hmm. In a show of solidarity and support. And it didn't happen just in New York, all over the country. There were instances of some officers actually taking a knee with protesters as they were getting down. You had other officers who were yelling on bullhorns, as long as you don't, cross this protest line or go in this area, we'll allow you to protest. And so those things were happening. They were no less intense. There were shouting, but there were tons of peaceful demonstrations and rousing speeches from young people all over the country. Yeah. But then you had, as you said, others that have come to dominate the news cycle, where we've seen some cases of looting and and rioting, unfortunately.
Right. Buildings being burnt down. And I mean, the fact is that obviously the National Guard was also called in to at least something like 21 cities.
Hmm.
And of course, it has been dominating the headlines, the looting, the rioting, and the violence that we've seen. On Friday, you really put that into context for us. And as you watched it unfold over the weekend, what was your reaction?
I was heartbroken.
Yeah.
I was heartbroken. I have a very close friend in Chicago who owns African-American Black-owned business in Hyde Park. Every year he throws a festival. His name is Jonathan Swain. He owns Kimbark Liquors, hosts a festival called that Hyde Park Brew Fest. Great for the community, just a fantastic person, a pillar, an African-American community. His store was looted. His store was looted, windows were shattered. And I called him to check on him and potentially, just get a feel for what things were happening and what was going on the ground. And he said, listen, I understand. He said, I understand why this happens and I understand why these conversations need to happen. He said, as I board up my store and I put up signs that says, this is a Black-owned business, I understand that there are people who are not from this community and don't even care about these protests, who have infiltrated the protests and for their own purposes began to create this riot. And, as I looked at my home city, going through so much, I mean, it looks like a ghost town. It looks like a war zone has literally happened. And I'm
Or people
so
preparing for a hurricane. You see like the barricades coming up, and,
yes.
the wood, covering the glass of all these shops and stores. Yeah.
I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it because it's when you see your hometown. I haven't been home and throughout this pandemic. I'm here in New York City, calling around, looking at people going live on Instagram, trying to get a feel for what's happening on the ground, and to see places that I once recognized now be decimated was one of the most heartbreaking things to me, especially as we report and contextualize what it is that people are feeling. And now getting into this space where you've got protesters protesting peacefully. Then you've got demonstrators who may be rowdy because of the pain, the frustration, and the passion. And then you've got looters who have nothing to do with this, who see an opportunity to sow discord. And then you have allegations of agent provocateurs who have become a part of these protests in an attempt to co-opt it for their own purposes. So it's very confusing,
Right.
It's heartbreaking. And in a time like this, I wish we had more leaders who could speak out and give us a message of unity and direction and strategy in terms of how we move forward from here. But that is not to be seen except for by certain mayors and certain governors in some cases.
Absolutely. And on that note, we also, speaking of a lack of leadership, we had President Donald Trump today. There were reports that this morning he told governors to, quote, dominate protesters, which was hard to read. It's hard to react to. And I can only speak from my own experience from over the weekend, where I found myself in the middle of the action in Beverly Hills in particular, which, by the way, I'll admit, wasn't exactly by choice, my participation. I didn't find the protest found me. And when I was there and walking through those crowds, it was as peaceful as it can be. People literally just walking into the crowds, walking down Rodeo Drive. But then at a point I saw all of like the U.S. military and police officers in riot gear, tear gas. I think that's really what started escalating from my point of view. I feel like there is a lack of leadership. And then there's also this other part where we have people like the police who don't know better either. And they're just going to go straight to the extreme. What are your thoughts?
That's something you said right now, just now, that was so profound. And in one sentence, contextualizes the moment we're in. You said, I didn't go to the protest found me. And I don't know if in my lifetime, in our lifetimes, we've seen a moment. We've seen protests between Trayvon Martin, we've seen Michael Brown Ferguson, we've seen Kwame McDonald protests, we've seen Kia Boyd protests locally in my hometown. But I don't know if I've seen a moment where I felt like the energy permeated so many different segments of society. We're talking about Beverly Hills, we're talking about non-African Americans protesting and sharing and having conversations within their homes. And when you look at these peaceful protests, and then you see folks who I know don't normally protest go outside for the first time, and they're met with riot gear, they're met with tanks, they're met with tear gas, and they're wondering how this all happened. And others who are passionate in other ways begin to see that show of force and match that energy. It's very counterproductive, not only on the part of the protesters, but on the part of the American government in terms of moving forward. And it creates an us versus them mentality. Getting to your original question about the president, he has trafficked in us versus them ideology and championed that rhetoric since he began his run. And if for nothing, we can say that this president has been consistent in that messaging and in acting on it.
Right.
And it has not been apparent, any more apparent than in a time like this.
And that's why it's up to us, the collective, and to everyone out there, whether they're taking the streets or donating money to the right organizations or just speaking out. I think it's important for us not to be silent. And, I want to bring up my own experience with this because it's something that I struggle with that day, not just because of the emotions and how overwhelming just the pure sight of it was, but also I had to confront my own fear and my own privilege, like the privilege to decide to whether I want to participate in this protest or not, my privilege to turn off the news, to sign off Twitter. Not everyone has that right. And there comes a time where you have to choose, what side you want to be on. And I bring that up, not to only hold myself accountable, but to also express to people that there's different ways to, the activism is a spectrum in terms of how you help,
Yeah.
And, obviously President Obama wrote a speech, an essay, I should say, published today, where he ultimately was calling on this new generation of activists, calling on them to reshape strategies to fit the times. Do you have any thoughts on, what we need to see for change to happen next?
It was something Obama said in his essay. He said, if we want our criminal justice system and American society at large to operate at a higher ethical code, then we have to model that ethical code ourselves. And I'm not seeing President Trump model an ethical code that the rest of the nation can kind of get behind. And what I love about what he said in the piece was that young people are figuring out new ways to mobilize, new ways to strategize. And it's something that even before reading the essay, I said in my report today, because, we've been taught so much about Dr. Martin Luther King's method of nonviolent protest, so much so that we believe that marching is the only protest, or that boycotting is the only protest. There are multiple ways to engage, whether that means, what conversations that you're having, or if that means unique forms of boycotting entities that may not be directly connected to the police department or the offending body, but may have leverage in compelling city government to do something about this problem. May have leverage, I'm thinking about the business community, might have leverage in local municipalities to tell the mayors to get their police departments under control. And I think that we need to interrogate what other forms of protest might look like. Just because 60 years ago, there was a popular way or a particular way of mobilizing, it doesn't mean that was the only way. And we need to look through world history and figure out other ways to strategize and mobilize. And as remarkable as Martin Luther King was in his leadership and showing us that ethical code that Obama talks about, you can still exhibit that same code of honor and ethics and civility without doing the exact same thing over and over again. And I'm not sure what that answer is, but I hope we find it.
I think one thing we can all agree on is that because of the events of the last few days and George Floyd's death, and really just years of people being fed up with the systemic racism that exists in this country, we're seeing a lot of people use their voice in whatever way they can. They're stepping up, they're showing up for the Black community. And I have to mention, obviously, you and I are part of the Viacom CBS family. And even today at 5 p.m., we're observing a complete blackout of programming, both on linear TV and on digital, in honor of George Floyd. And I've seen a lot of different brands kind of show up in that way. And it makes me proud to work where we work.
I'm very proud of where we work. I'm very proud of Viacom CBS for doing this. We're off all Tuesday. And, it's the show must pause is the hashtag that folks are using. Search that hashtag, find out other resources that we're putting out there. The showmustpause.com has links at the bottom for which you can use to donate to different families who have been affected by this issue.
This is why I'm really grateful that you joined us and that we're able to actually have this kind of dialogue on this platform. And so all I can say is thank you. And I don't think this will be the last time you and I be chatting, my friend. So appreciate your time.
I'm so appreciative of you and this platform and this conversation and your Absolutely. Personal connection to this issue. And I can't wait to join you again, Denny, hopefully on better circumstances.
I agree with that. Thanks, brother.
All right.